Hi, everyone. This is James Sinclair. Thank you for joining us. I am the principal of Enterprise Alumni with a market-leading alumni management solution for companies looking to engage and manage their former employees. And this is the Corporate Alumni Leaders series, where we bring in experts and amazing people to talk about strategy, engagement, value, reporting, mayhem, and everything that really goes into running a successful community. Today, I'm beyond thrilled to have Jono Bacon. For those of you who don't know him, we're going to talk about his social handles and all the stuff he does. But his book, which I just read, People Powered, is incredible with some amazing stories. And more importantly, every one of our listeners is going to get a copy of his book. So as we talk about it in this episode, look into your email in the next few hours. You're definitely going to get a copy there. But more importantly, we're always talking about needing someone in the trenches to fight, to make the community successful. We're always talking about being overly honest with kind of your community. Is it working and what needs to change? And I can't think of a better person than Jono, who's kind of been there, done that, and got the t-shirt. And so today, when we're talking about how to leverage peer relationships in your community, essentially how your alumni can help each other and therefore help you, I can't think of anyone better to speak to than Jono about this. So over to you, Jono. Straight away, I'm going to let you do the intro. I will throw out the flag of your book so you don't have to feel like you're selling anything. This is the book, People Powered, that everyone's getting. As I told some people while we were in the pre-call, I just finished reading it. I loved it. I thought it was really honest, really authentic, some great practical tips. So I'm really, really thrilled to have you. But maybe you can just give us a quick 2 minutes, who you are, where you're from, how the hell you ended up here.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, James. What an intro. That was very kind of you indeed. Thank you very much. Well, hello, everybody. It's great to be here. Hope you're all safe and well, wherever you may be today. So as a little bit of background, I've been building communities now for, frankly, my whole career. I first discovered the concept of communities when I was 18, living at home with my mum and dad. I used to have long hair, believe it or not, before it started growing inwards and coming out my toes. And I was living at home with my parents, and I was introduced by my brother to this technology platform called Linux. And I bought a book about it because I worked in a bookshop, and it basically talked about, the first chapter was about how people all over the world come together to build this software online, essentially. And I was just mesmerized by this concept of people all over the world working together electronically to build something. And of course, back in the 90s, this wasn't really very prevalent. We didn't have Google Docs, back then. So I have the kind of personality where I go down the rabbit hole when I'm interested in anything. And I went down the rabbit hole, started learning about this. And the only way to learn was really to experiment and to play, because there wasn't any books about this or anything like that. So I started building communities in the UK, and then went and worked at a place called OpenAdvantage, which was basically a government-funded organization that was helping companies to use open source software. And we had to move 10 businesses a month from a specific region in the UK to open source, which was incredibly, difficult metric to hit, but we did it. And then I went to a company called Canonical, which builds this platform called Ubuntu, and we built a really large community there, a couple of 100,000 developers and millions of users, people doing all kinds of work within Ubuntu. Then I went to XPRIZE, which is an organization that has huge incentive competitions to solve major problems in the world. So the first XPRIZE, for example, that I worked on was a $15 million competition that was primarily funded by Elon Musk, that challenged teams to build an Android app for a tablet that teaches kids how to read, write, and do arithmetic without the aid of a teacher within 18 months. This is designed for the 250 million kids in the world who don't have access to teaching. Then I went to GitHub, which is the epicenter of where people build software and technology, especially open source. And then after that, I became a consultant full time. I'd been consulting on the side because back in about 12 years ago, I think it was, 12 years ago, I released a book called The Art of Community, which was the precursor to People Powered. And companies would reach out and say, okay, this is great, but how do I do it? How do I build this into my company? And I primarily work with big companies like Deutsche Bank and Sony Mobile and Samsung. And, did that on the side for a number of years. And then 4 years ago, went full time doing it. And I just think it's a fascinating journey, learning about how people work together, how communities are built. And that's the backstory.
So an amazing backstory. And the reason I asked for that context, Jono, is, there are two sides of this coin. People who have smaller communities where they're like, we're not big enough to do anything great. And people who have monster-sized communities who are like, oh my God, we're too big to do anything great. How are we going to scale it and automate it? And then there's people in the middle that are like, we don't know where we are. We're a bit lost. Everyone wants to make their community better. There's no community leader out there who's like, oh my God, life is perfect. Our numbers are perfect. Our engagement is perfect. Everyone is fighting to do something better, to find the unknown unknowns. One of the things that I think is really important around this conversation, if I was to throw all the questions I sent you earlier out the window and really go off what you just talked about, one of the things with corporate alumni, this concept of engaging people after they left, they voluntarily chose to leave your organization. They voluntarily said, you know what, I'm good with you, I'm out. And it can be under the greatest of circumstances, but they made that change. And now you're saying, even though you're out, let's still hug every now and again.
Yeah, let's still be friends.
Let's still be friends. And even though you're leaving us maybe in the lurch, maybe I need a replacement, whatever that conversation is, let's still be friends. And so sometimes organizations have this challenge where I guess my issue is I always believe, and you talk about it in the book a lot, you need someone in the trenches. The community, whether you want to talk about software or platform or technology or brand, there has to be someone or some people, singular or voluminous, that are driving the community forward. And one of the issues you have with corporate alumni, well, two of the issues is, one, they think they're different, like every organization. You don't know us, you don't understand us. We're this company, we're regulated, we're in banking, we're in whatever. And so that's my question is I want to talk a little bit about the pillars of community. It doesn't matter who you are, what you're approaching, Pet Bunny Club, Harley Davidson Club, Corporate Alumni Club, People We Fired Club, as awful or as amazing. When you think about the foundational pillars of starting a community, or just to clarify, there's probably already a community that exists that you're just going to take over and now formalize. There's always been a Harley Davidson Club. It was just Frank, and his five mates, up the road. This formula, how do you kind of approach this conversation of explaining to organizations that the pillars of community are the pillars of community? They're almost fixed and predictable, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think the key thing here in my mind is that we are a social species. So my philosophy when it comes to and I try to do this in People Powered is, and this is just how I approach any problem, is zoom all the way out and look at the first principles of what we're talking about. So up here at the top, when you think about communities, what are the first principles that drive it? Like, why do they happen? And I think one of the key things is that we are a social species, is that we like to spend time with other people. And the reason for that is because we have a part of our brain that finds comfort and security in being with other people who are like us. And that's one of the reasons that social media exists. It's one of the reasons why we're so divided politically, for example, is that we have that identification with people who are like us. But the other thing as well, I think, is that relationships are never transitory, right? So, for example, I worked at this company, Canonical. I joined in 2006. I left in 2014. And I still have an extremely close relationship with my colleagues that I work with there. The people who work for me, I consider them my family members. If they ever are in trouble, then I'll be there. I'll be first in line to try and help them out. And to me, the fact that we worked in the same place was merely the context. So that's why I think the alumni thing is really interesting, is that it's just natural. It fits. It's very compatible with how our brains tend to operate. I think generally, so long as you have a good experience, like if you had a good experience with a company, but even then, I think one of the things
you can mend, right? I think the other thing is, it is both ways. There are companies who say, if we fired you, you're not welcome to join the community, and they have a kind of exclusive policy. But people change, people iterate,
there's got to be a path to redemption, right? Which our society is sometimes uneasy with, that somebody screws up and then, okay, well, how do they make it good again? Because I think that you raise a good point, James, as well, is that one of the things I miss, for example, as just running my own business is that sense of camaraderie, especially in bad times. Like when you're going through a rough time with your colleagues, that sense of we're going through it together can be incredibly empowering. So even if you have a bad experience at a particular company. So to me, that's the high level about why it works. Then we need to get into, okay, well, how do you do it? How do you build a community that's going to be effective? Because the challenge I think that a lot of people face, I'm sure people who are watching this will be thinking this as well, I hear about like all of these different pieces, social media and community platforms and content and swag and all of this kind of stuff. Where do I even begin? Well, the way I approach it is fundamentally the best thing to do is to be intentional. Like if you're in, people say that, the definition of success is opportunity combined with preparation, right?
Right.
And we've got a lot of opportunity in the world, but we have to be prepared for it. And that's why I think we need to be intentional in how we implement it. So to give you an example, one of the comparisons I have to make is when you go to Disney World, from how you park your car to how you buy your tickets to how you go around the park and where the parades are and when the restaurants are open, everything's been really carefully crafted by Disney to maximize the quality of the guest experience and to get as many people through the park as possible. And the thing that we need to do with communities is to take the same approach. So be intentional about that experience. So for example, this is how I do it in People Power, but also when I work with clients. First question is, who are your audience? And what do they want? What is the value that they want? And one of the mistakes a lot of people make is they try to create benefits that people haven't necessarily expressed that they want, right? So let's say you've got a community of musicians, just to pull a random example, and you're saying, well, if you come and join our community, then you can learn how to manage your royalty statements better, or how, and no musician has ever expressed an interest in that. But to me, if you want to build anything, you got to focus on what are the problems that your audience has got, right? So what are they struggling with and what are they challenged by? And
I think a lot of companies do that. A lot of communities, and this is no fault on organizations. This is just how organizations have, and I like to have these open conversations that talk about the mayhem and the reality of it. But for a lot of companies, you're exactly right. They're making decisions on the 42nd floor in a conference room on behalf of a community that's not part of the conversation.
Exactly.
And they believe that their logo is going to sustain their community. The kind of, you talk about it as well. If you build it, they won't come. And the reality is their logo, I've always said the logo gets you in the door. You're right. I'm going to join because I was an alumni of IBM and I want to see kind of what's behind the gate. And there's going to be a percentage of people that are willing to knock on the door and have a peep. There's also a percentage of people who are like, I'm good. I know all my colleagues from IBM that I care about. I earn enough money. My life is great. I think that moves into the second conversation, which is about kind of being I don't want to be Brene Brown here, but being your authentic self, which is, the community manager. A lot of companies will have an alumni team. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have an alumni human who literally spends 2 hours a week because he or she was just lobbed this community and they're now stuck with it. And that's very common in a lot of organizations. If you go to your Disney example, everything's meticulous about treating the user perfectly and amazingly, but at the same time, maximizing the dollar. Milk in the back of the store. And so the view is, if you treat your people perfectly, and we're seeing that change in experience, treat everyone like your best customer, and they will in turn serve you. And I think we've seen that with corporate alumni communities, is people realizing if we just treat our people good, they'll pay it forward back to us. But I guess my question relates to being your authentic self. You have a lot of community managers that work for regulated industries. There's people on this call who work for government organizations. Who do they represent? Are they a human that has a logo on their face of the company they represent? Are they the resume version of themselves? Or are they their authentic self? And you see the communities that really succeed where the person says, I'm going to be me. I'm going to help people. I'm going to be amazing. The brand sits above me. But how do you even,
right?
I guess, there's a question in there somewhere.
No, I get what you're asking. And I think you're touching on something that's so important. That's something that larger corporations often struggle with, because larger corporations tend to be command and control environments. So there's a series of gates at every level, right?
Right.
Like I often hear social media professionals, for example, complaining in these kinds of organizations that tweets need 14 levels of review because everything has to be protected. The way I look at it is the first thing is, just to kind of underline what I was just saying about the audience, is to really understand what your audience wants. And sometimes that is what like you said, like the decisions that are made on the 42nd floor are not necessarily what audience actually wants. I'll give you a simple example. When I work with companies, often we'll put together content strategy. So how people can deliver content that's going to be interesting to their community or to their audience. And they'll come up with so many ideas that will be interesting to them. And I've got to outline, like, really? No one's going to care about that. Like, for example, nobody wants an interview with your product manager. No one cares. No one cares. All of these interviews with product managers and engineering leads, that's about you. And you need to be in service of them. And I go back to Seth Godin's perspective here, which I've seen countless times over the course of my career, is that when you're of service to other people, then good things happen to you. So if I was in the if I was in the position of a corporate organization, the first thing I'd want to do is, first of all, what are the challenges? What are the problems? What are the roadblocks that our audience have got? And then how do we construct an environment where we can authentically serve them? And that's what it's all about.
So, John, I apologize. I just interrupted you in a great stream of thought, but that was a really important point. How can I be of service to you? And I think that's a really tough concept to understand. If you're good to your people, let's call it alumni, that's what we're in the business of. We always tell people that as a software vendor, we are not actually, our customer is not the person that pays us, is not the bank, is not the agency, is not, is not whoever it is. Our customer is the end user. And if we deliver them the most incredible experience, easy to use, easy to enjoy, all the things, we promise they'll pay it forward. And I think there's this thought that is very tough for customers to understand, which is being good to your people is just good for business. And people are like, oh, that's amazing. Put it in an Excel spreadsheet. And smiles are difficult sometimes to put in. And we talked to Karen Melissa Jones, who said sometimes the things that count the most are the hardest to count. And I thought that was really impactful. So as we think about kind of being of service to people, LinkedIn is the one that comes to mind. So LinkedIn Alumni Network is very, very strong. And they have two things I want to talk about with you. One of them is swag. The second, though, is when they went through this period, they had some reorganization. Every company has gone through it. It's a difficult time. What you saw creep up is everybody that had worked at LinkedIn prior and had gone on somewhere else was posting on the alumni network, I now work here. If we work together, contact me. I can probably help you find a new job. I'm looking for this job. Essentially, no one put a link to like careers.salesforce.com and was like, hey, apply here. It was contact me if we work together or if I know you and I can get you another job. And what you saw come together was almost, I think it was something like 500 individual postings from people that have essentially left LinkedIn, gone on to something better, stronger. And now essentially, I think it was, I forget who says it, sending the elevator back down, doing their service to others. And LinkedIn had nothing to do with it. The only common bond was they worked in the same building together, whatever that means. But all it was is the people, and all of a sudden the community exploded with smiles, with excitement. You're talking about people that have been let go in the worst of times who are smiling and saying thank you because they feel the love. And the question that I was then asking is, right, how do we measure? How do we perform? How do we convert that into a dashboard that goes to senior leadership to make sure budget expansion, all of those things? But I've never seen a program as successful as the LinkedIn program. And they did it on LinkedIn.com as well. You may have seen people posting if you need some help. It was amazing, but service to each other is the number one way to get explosion. So sorry, go.
Yeah, no, I think exactly. I think it's so critical, but it's unintuitive, I think, in a traditional corporate environment. I think it's intellectually intuitive. Yeah, we need to be of service to our customers or our employees or our ex-employees. But what does that actually mean? And where do you mark the priorities? I think is where it's difficult. And that's why I keep coming back to really understanding your audience is the key thing. I think the benefit and the opportunity of alumni communities, in my mind, is that one of the strongest elements of why communities work is that when somebody has a good experience in the community, first of all, a community is a network of minds, right? Everybody who's in your community has got time, a certain degree of time, even if it's just 10 minutes or it may be 10 hours, but they've got time, they've got talent, they've got expertise, and they've got enthusiasm. And when you can unlock that and channel that into a shared environment, that's when you get the fruits of a community. Now, where I think there's an opportunity with alumni communities is that, again, we as human beings, when we have a good experience with something or with somebody, we have this sense of reciprocity, which is a very common psychological pattern. Right. So, people, for example, who are in here right now watching this, if people leave this session and think, wow, that was really useful, they will not only think, that your company, right, is powerful and interesting. They'll have a positive affiliation with you personally, with me personally, and then when there's other things in the future with those three elements, they're going to be more likely to spend time there. So to me, where it's powerful, but where there is a risk here, is if you set up an alumni community and you make it, frankly, it's a broadcast mechanism to spread more information about the company. If it's just about updating that group of people about the company's products and services and whatever else, it's going to fail. It's just not going to work. And it may conceivably tick some boxes in some way. You may get some views, but it won't actually meet the needs. Because I think what's important here is that, and this is the challenge with communities, is companies quite naturally want to derive a specific set of value props out of it, right? So, okay, well, if we set up an alumni community, let's
sell
say
more, recruit more, love more, NPS more, bullshit more,
all that kind of stuff. Like it's going to be, okay, we want them to, to have great conversations, deliver great value, all that kind of stuff. But a big chunk of this, I think, is fostering the culture that that we are one when it comes to that company. Like I know people, for example, I've met people, who are in their 80s who worked at Boeing, and they will consider themselves Jim first, secondly a Boeing employee, thirdly something else.
So they bleed
they bleed, exactly, they bleed it. And the tricky thing, I think, is that is very challenging for a lot of traditional corporate operatives, and that's why I think we have to focus on the critical pieces of what,
especially as people are jumping from job to job now. We think about Jim at Boeing. Jim left college at 21, joined Boeing as, a janitor, and left Boeing as a senior vice president of something, 60 years later or 40 years later. And now when you see tenure going down to like 2.5 years, people being so okay with leaving and companies being so okay with leaving. So I kind of want to jump back, and, every time you talk, I'm like, I want to grab on that point. It is, being intentional and understanding that the difference between a community of alumni and an alumni community. And many companies can create a lot of positive statistics and dashboards by being a dictatorship. We're going to have a portal. You can log in to read about our new office in Buenos Aires. You can look at an address book, which you already get on LinkedIn, so you don't need. There's news that you don't need. A lot of what we tell people is the new alumni community is finding something that's wholly different they can't get anywhere else. I don't need you and your website to read news. I don't even need you to give me the directory. Now, if you want to introduce me to specific people, that's a different story. I want things that are going to impact my life. And, and we always ask the company, what is so different about your community? What can I only get at yours? And it might not be a destination, because the other thing about an alumni community is it doesn't matter where you touch those people. Email, phone, smiles, website, Facebook, whatever, who cares? When you touch them appropriately and they smile, that's a relationship and that's engagement. But you can still be a dictatorship with a mailing list. Because you always have new users, because there's always, your company has 12% attrition, 7% attrition. So you're getting 3,000 users a year, and you're getting, 20% open, 10% click, but actually your community is not a community. It's North Korea. And I want to talk about that a little bit, which is the reason a lot of it is like that. It is not the fault of the individual. It's the fault of the environment they're in, and the risk, the legal, the 14 steps to get a tweet approved, all of these things that prevent us being authentic and human. And if you want to let people help each other, this also doesn't mean a free-for-all. It doesn't mean like, woohoo, go nuts. It's intentionally setting up a framework to deliver that help to each other. But I guess for a lot of the people I'm seeing on this call who are in a position where they do have 14 levels of approval and they do all of that, they're like, oh my God, yes, we have, 3,000, 2,000, 10,000, 100,000 alumni. Where do I even start to connect our alumni, whatever that might mean, and essentially drive the value, a la the LinkedIn conversation of how can I help you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And why don't we break this into two pieces? So I think one is going to be the approach, and then second is going to be the tactics. So the first thing I would say is, if I was in the position of setting up an alumni community, this is what I would do. The first thing I would do is I would want to focus on the principle that when you join out, let's say, we're talking about James Corp, right, is my company. When you join James Corp, whether you're here for 6 months or whether you're here for 6 years, you're part of the family. And the alumni community is a place where the family gathers, okay? And the goal here is to continue the growth of our family members. This is going to be focused on webinars and education and other things. So the first thing is, I think, is setting the expectation that that's going to be the culture that we want to foster. Now, I think when we zoom out a little bit, when we look at businesses, especially larger businesses, command and control businesses, one thing that often resonates, and I think one thing that resonates generally in business, are the leaders who take a step back and say, okay, I know we're doing this, but why are we doing this? And what is the decision making behind it? And challenge that decision making while always focusing on the core first principles of what we're seeking to achieve. Okay. So for example, if I was working with a company and they were saying, okay, well, why don't we do a bunch of interviews with product managers that we'll put into our alumni community? My perspective as a leader would be, how does that serve our audience's purpose of we're here to invest in the success of our family members? It doesn't. It merely educates people on what we're doing. Is it fair to
say you've got to be willing to say, who cares? Someone has to be an advocate. That's why we would talk about the trenches. Someone's got to be an advocate for the alumni that says, Sheila just gives no F's about your interview with the product manager.
Right.
And if you can't understand that, then we need to change our strategy. And it's very difficult to, when you're in a small team of 4 people or just by yourself, it's difficult to see outside the bubble, perhaps, of
exactly.
No one wants to see that.
And the way I would phrase this will be, instead of us doing an interview with the product manager, let's flip it on its side and say, why don't we have a product manager share 5 product management principles that could be useful to our audience? Because then we're investing in their success. We're not merely communicating our success. So that's the first thing.
Educate.
Right. So that's the first thing I would approach. The second thing I would look at when it comes to the tactics of how you actually deliver that. So how do you actually, what do you actually do? First of all, you need a place where people can spend time together. So you need a clubhouse, right? So in traditional communities, that can be a forum, it can be a Slack channel, it can be any of those kinds of places. And I think you need to, you're right. You need to create, exactly. You need to create an environment that is safe and secure for those people to spend time there. Okay.
What does that mean? What does it mean by safe and secure? And I apologize to ask you to define that, because that's a really important topic about safe and secure, because so many companies think safe and secure is what happens if a troll comes in and does this. And you see so many communities lock down everything because they're fearful of one idiot coming in and being an idiot. So 99.9% of the community, has to go through an approval process to post or to like or to comment because they're worried about Frank. And so what does it mean to be a safe space?
So what I mean by that is I think when you've worked for a company, you should be able to have conversations that would be suitable around the water cooler internally, but you wouldn't necessarily want on the internet. So I would recommend that these communities, in many cases, would be private. It would depend on the community and how it functions. So that to me is one element. But the other element is a place where you do have productive, constructive conversation. You see, the challenge I've seen with when you get groups who used to work at companies together is they can just spend a lot of time whining about things that they were disgruntled about when they worked there.
Right.
So the expectations I would set in that community when people come in is, frankly, this is not a right. This is a privilege. You don't have the right to be here, and you can be here if we observe a certain set of principles. So one is going to be that we're investing in each other's success. We're not here to carp and complain, and we attack the idea, not the people.
How does one communicate those principles? Is that part of the kind of onboarding welcome? Is it kind of just known? I think for a lot of companies, it's like, well, it's inherent because it is, but it's not inherent. Like, what do we...
Right.
They don't say to people, hey, this is the purpose of the community. This is what we'd love you to do. They're very tactical and functional. Go here to look for a job. Go here to apply for a job.
Right.
Go here to read the product manager story, as opposed to saying, hey, this community's for you. Like, here's how you can get involved. And there's so many people, there's so many fanatics that want to get involved, and companies get very scared about those fanatics.
Yeah.
And rightly so for some, but they're fanatics for a reason. They bleed the company, and you can't get annoyed at them that they are so passionate just because they've retired or they've left. You can't be like, oh my God, you're so annoying to me because you really loved working.
Because you're so excited, right?
Because you're so excited about this community. So where does one set the, call it, expectations, principles, core values? Is that something you share with your community? And are they the same to your users as they are internally to your company?
Right. So I think there's two ways to do. There's two things we need to do here. The mistake that people make is they put them into a page on a website that nobody reads.
Right.
Well, this is the problem with, for example, with codes of conduct. Is in recent years with the focus on diversity and inclusion, naturally there's been a lot of discussion about people putting codes of conduct at conferences, on communities and whatever else. And here's the thing: assholes don't read codes of conduct, right? They just don't. So what we need to do, I think, is set the expectation.
Make sure you know that quote is going to be on the LinkedIn image. Assholes don't read codes of conduct. I want to make sure we all remember that moment.
Right. So what we need to do, I think, is we need to set the expectation when people come in that this is a collaborative environment, and these are, let's say, 4 or 5 principles that are important to us. So it's, you know, it's 5 bullet points, and it's going to be things like we're respectful to each other. We attack the idea, not the person. Those kinds of things that we talked about, and you'd want to wordsmith those so they look good. But the second thing I think here is then whoever is in the trenches and coordinating the community and running the community, and especially the leaders in that company, is their behavior sets the tone. So another psychological principle that is important for us to remember is that human beings mimic their leaders. So if you've got a leader that is mean and irresponsible and a despot, then people will imitate that behavior because they think that that's what leadership should be. If you have somebody who's going to be open and collaborative and respectful, then you'll get that. You tend to get that kind of behavior.
Would it be fair to say that's the same, Jono, with the person in the trenches who doesn't say anything, do anything, hides behind their computer screen? If you hide behind your computer screen as the alumni community leader and you're not actually in the trenches fighting, people misunderstand community. Someone has got to fight to make it work. It doesn't just bubble up in unicorns and rainbows.
Exactly.
And so if you are silent and if you are not human, you're just a brand, why would you expect your community to be anything different, right?
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing, is that the value of the community, and I would argue, especially within an alumni context, is that sense of connection and keeping the connection open. Like if some, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when somebody comes in and tries, for example, to shut down a conversation because somebody disagrees with them.
Right.
And that's where the responsibility of the leadership in the community is going to be about maintaining the collaboration and the discussion while also protecting the values. I'll give you an example of this. I actually put this into People Powered. So still Stephen Colbert when he was doing one of his late night shows, had Ted Cruz, right, the Republican politician, on there, which was an unusual venue for Ted Cruz, super conservative, Stephen Colbert, very liberal, and a very liberal audience. And Ted Cruz was talking about something. I forget what it was, but I think it was fairly benign. And the audience just started booing him. And Colbert stopped him and said, "Okay, everybody, let's give him an opportunity to speak." And I thought it was really impressive that Colbert did that. Irrespective of what you think about what Ted Cruz was saying, he was saying Ted Cruz isn't being disrespectful at this particular moment. Therefore, you should have
expressing a view you disagree with.
Expressing that you might disagree with, and that is where I think it gets tricky. Is that we don't shut people down, and there's a natural inclination towards that, I think, with some people. So to me, that's one element of it. But the other thing I think, when it comes to the tactics, just to zone in on real quick, is the good news about communities is they can be as long as a piece of string.
Right.
So, for example, you could have, as part of your enterprise alumni community, you could have, frankly, just do a monthly webinar where you bring people together and you deliver some content, or you have a conversation like this, or you could have like weekly content and blog posts and all kinds of stuff. So you can design it as you want it. I think the key thing is that you create that environment where people can really tap into each other's experience and ideas. And then you get things like, hey, I'm looking to hire a CMO. I'm looking to hire this particular role in my new gig.
If you give the foundation, all these things will bubble up to the top.
Yeah.
But you need, and I guess I apologize for keeping going back to it. Someone has to be in the community fighting to make it work. And the reason I want to bubble back to this is, we talk to our customers and we get different feedback. Some people say, I'm too junior. This isn't my full-time job. I'm not a community manager. I'm actually in talent acquisition. I'm just, I've been lobbed this thing. You also see people say, well, we're a team. No one person is the flag. And what happens if they leave? And as a company, we don't have individuals. We're only a team. And it's like, all of those are phenomenal stories.
Yes.
Great stories. No one cares. You're either in the trenches so you know, I guess my question or my statement is how do you qualify or quantify or pray to an organization that if you aren't out there battling, fighting, connecting, you know, using your social media personally, individually, as a human, you know, is it okay for someone to be the face of a community? So I personally believe it's someone has to be kind of the backbone of the community, and it's an individual. And I know that's really hard, you know, for customers to or for companies to take, you know, what, Julie is the community? No, it's our community.
Right.
How do you deal with that leap?
It's tricky. So first of all, yeah, I agree with you, James. Like, I think you need an individual who is directly responsible, the directly responsible individual for that community. And the role of that individual primarily is to grease the wheels, is to facilitate the success of the community. But you need someone whose neck is on the line for that community to deliver success for the company, but frankly, and even more importantly, to deliver success for the community members. Okay, because what's the point if you're not generating value for the community members? There is no point. It's just peeing in the wind.
It's a mailing list.
So that's one element. But the tricky thing I think that you're zoning in on is what's a very common pattern here. Someone comes in as the community manager, and then the employees of the company think, Julie, she takes care of the community. I can safely ignore it. I support it, but I can safely ignore it. That's what Julie does. And that is a bad pattern to be in.
Right.
So this is easier for smaller companies. If you're a startup, the thing I always recommend to clients, for example, is when you create your new community, whether it's a product community or whether it's an enterprise alumni community, whatever it might be, you need to set the expectation with your team that our community is as important as our product. It's arguably more important. Products are purchased by people, and people are the backbone of communities.
Right.
So if you say that the community is just a forum or a, you know, something that sits on the side and isn't really part of what we do, then you're not connecting the most critical pieces together. So
so many programs move up into like office of the chief of staff, office of the CEO, because they believe that this community is so dotted line. You can't have it live in just talent or just comms or just sales. It's the fabric of the organization, especially as people are being more conscious or being more intentional with their purchasing decisions. And I think people forget that, you know, essentially treat everyone like your best customer. We have, you know, 32,000 alumni in a community. Why? And we see that all the time with a lot of customers. We're going through, very big customers. We'll go through procurement, this awful security, IT negotiation process. And they'll be like, what is this thing? And it's like, you've had this community for 12 years. You don't even know about it. There's the problem with, this is why you're going to have such a challenge, right?
Well, and that's exactly. And that's the thing is that, first of all, I think the executives need to set the expectation. This is part of what we do. For example, I remember working with a company called HackerOne, and they brought in a new CEO, this guy called Mattermost, who's very successful in tech. The first thing he said when he came in was, I don't care whether you are an executive or whether you're sweeping the floor. You have to engage with our community. Our community is part of what we do. It's part of the fabric of what we do here. So you need that kind of stipulation, but it's easy for execs to make that stipulation and then forget about it.
Right.
So the true test is how you factor that into the day-to-day. So that can be, first of all, making it really simple for your team members to go and join the community and to go and spend time there, making it very clear what success is. Like success, for example, is engaging in other people's success. It's that Seth Godin sense of service, making time for them, like especially within companies. Like if you've got a full plate of things that you need to do, and your execs are expecting you to go and spend half an hour a day in the enterprise alumni community, well, what isn't getting done? So, for example, that's another consideration is you making that. And I even go so far as saying that you don't necessarily make it a performance requirement that if you don't join the community, then you're going to get canned. But what you do is you tie it to incentives and rewards. So the people who are notably spending time in your alumni community, supporting people who used to work at the company and helping them to be successful, then you recognize you reward that. But it is really difficult. Yeah. It's really difficult, especially in large companies, but it's not impossible. But it needs.
I think you talk about this rewards and performance and QBRs and all of these things that the people on the call from the large organizations know. You know, there is nothing in their quarterly performance review that relates to community because companies haven't worked out how to measure. And the things they
Right.
are measuring are not the things that anyone cares about. You know, they're measuring all the wrong things for all the right reasons, and they just don't know any better. And they're certainly, especially in senior leadership, not willing to listen to Julie in the basement with her little alumni community that seems fun. But that's also why you've seen throughout this crisis, when companies have been reorganizing, that community leaders seem to be the first to be like, oh, we can get rid of the community leader, and you know, why don't you just take it on and do that as well as part of your job? You've started to, you know,
Yes.
and so you have two kind of foundationals. One is, for a lot of people, communities are a cost center and a nice to have, kind of the worst quadrant you could possibly be in. You know, but I think they are starting, you know, one of the things we're telling our customers is you've got to move your quadrant out of nice to have cost center into must have profit center. And the way to do that is to fight internally. The greatest way to build your community, aside from leveraging your community, is to face inwards, is to sell it internally, to sell it to every single stakeholder who's willing to listen about how this can serve them. And I'm not talking about an email that says, hey, we have an alumni community, want to check it out. It's, here's how our members, our army, can service you. And I think that's
exactly
the third learning. So the first one, we've got to have someone in the trenches. Second was be really intentional, was understand that no one cares about your product manager interview, but change it and make it about value and expectations. You've got to have an advocate. And the third is, if you are not, as an individual, fighting or advocating for your program internally, you will lose your budget, or you're certainly not going to gain new budget. So you may plod along, but you know, you're sitting there talking about how under-resourced you are, how lack of no one cares, how you can't get anything, how you can't do anything. And here you are with thousands of people literally ready to go to battle for you. And no one knows, and you haven't communicated that, and that's on you as an individual. And so when it talks about kind of how do you, you know, carry the flag upstairs, you know, you're mid-level, maybe you're senior, maybe you're not. How do you wake the F up? Look at what we have here. How do you do that without, well, with saying that perhaps?
Well, and the thing is, I think to that point is, I think the way in which you do that is, if you're going to a leadership group and you're saying, okay, this is important. I think the first thing is, you've got to be clear on what you want to deliver and what that looks like. But the second thing I think is that is understanding what are the priorities of the leadership, and how does this community serve those priorities, right? And the good news is that I have not been to a single company in my entire career where I've talked to leadership, even in large companies like Deutsche Bank, like Sony Mobile, like Google, where the value that a community delivers is not in line with the priorities that the execs have got. Yeah. Because the priorities that the execs have got almost always includes delivering an amazing customer experience, outstanding value, building amazing brand recognition. All of those things are in line with the value that right. Fabric. I mean, that is what communities are all about. I think where it gets stuck is that execs are put in a position of making hundreds of decisions every single day. And I think some people who work in community, they go and present to them a very, very comprehensive plan that they spent a lot of time working on, but there's too much detail. So you got to be able to go to the execs and say, we're going to do these three things, right? These three things. And we're going to experiment. We're going to start small, and we're going to get some early wins, and then we'll gradually grow and grow and grow. But then being able to say to the execs, you know, get them sold on it, but then say, we can do this, but we have to have a minimum level of commitment. And the commitment is that we emphasize to our teams that this is part of what we do. If you don't have that buy-in from your executive team, and if you don't have that the importance of prioritizing it as not the most important thing, but an important thing, it won't succeed. Because what you'll have is, you'll have poor Julie in the basement trying to get things rolling.
And no one cares.
And first of all, your community members don't just want to talk to Julie. They want to talk to your team. Right. And I think that's what's critical. But the good news is that there are many companies that have done this very successfully. It's not rocket science, but it has to be translated into something that the execs can wrap their heads around.
Julie, who's on the call, literally just sent me a chat saying, "Are you talking about me?" No, Julie, they're not talking about you. We'll
not you specifically, Julie.
Not you specifically, but I do.
That would be creepy.
Yeah, super creepy, but I do feel for you in the basement. So one of the things we tell our customers to do who are starting this program, and it's new, is you get to define the success criteria. Your senior leadership don't have a playbook for a community. Exactly what you said. If you read like the annual financial report for a public company, you can pull out the 4 things they're trying to do this year. You can pull out the 6 bullet points of the objectives, and they almost always can, not even dotted line, can direct line to your community. So we often tell people, start an internal mailing list, just start emailing people once a quarter with the big wins. The big wins, and just one slide, no text, tiny text, just some. And one of the things that Mike DeStefano from EY talked about is he started putting in his wins internally, the big movers. So for example, they had a guy, and I've used this phrase before and I got in trouble, but I'm going to use it again, which is they had a guy who started at the company as like a tax janitor when Ernst & Young was, or EY was Arthur Anderson, like, decades and decades ago, like, Jim from Boeing. And now he's on the board of a public company. And so that was included in the email that went out quarterly. And he just includes everyone in senior leadership just by default, because no one doesn't like good news. And no one remembers his pie charts, his stuff, his data, his ROI spreadsheet. Everyone remembers, yeah, can you believe that guy is now a board member? Isn't it amazing we stayed in contact with him? And so if you are not sending out your win announcement, your scorecard, your whatever, and it doesn't look incredible, and by look incredible, I mean people should open it up and be like, wow, we're producing something like this. And people forget about the importance of kind of creative design and how it makes you feel when you look at something. But you should be sending out a wins. And some customers do it monthly, every month, and they just literally find the DLs in their address book. And I understand it's a bit of a hack. Perhaps you haven't got their permission to. You know what? Find the deals. No one is going to say, wow, this is terrible news, Julie. You're doing something amazing and incredible for the company, delivering value. Take me off this mailing list. No, someone is going to reply to you. And if you do that enough, over time, you can start to add a sentence to the bottom of your email. I need some help. Can you help me with this? Does anyone have a link into something?
Exactly.
We're thinking, if you train people to have good news, you can start to ask for stuff. Exactly with you, I imagine, and your book, Jono. You have been an advocate of community, helping people, content. So when you emailed and your book came out, I'm sure you emailed a few people saying, hey, companies, do you mind doing a couple of bulk orders? And I'm making an assumption, maybe you didn't.
Yeah,
but
no, totally.
People were like, of course, it's not even a thing. And I don't even feel like you're asking me for anything. In fact, if anything, I feel like, of course I would. Why didn't I come to you first? And so you've got to build that up into, if you don't have an internal mailing list where you are sending your win announcement, you will be forever not Julie, in the basement, fighting for resources with no one caring, and your procurement or other teams not even knowing that there's an N in the word alumni type of thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I think to your point, James, it's about the tricky thing, I think, and this is where a lot of companies get into trouble, is the executives zoning in on those 3 major trends and goals that they want to achieve, like how they want to move the needle more broadly, and they're looking at it as a whole business. Often Julie in the basement is focusing on the tactics. Not Julie is focusing on the tactics of, okay, well, how many people are coming to our platform? How long are they spending there? What's the bounce rate? All that kind of stuff. And that is really important, because that's how you make progress happen. But ultimately, you got to communicate those things back up, is how we're serving these core pillars of the community. The one thing that, again, where I find this really fascinating is that if you look at the value that communities deliver, it is always in line with what executives want to see. And one of the most common elements of this is that relationships last longer than tenure, right? So and the positive experience with a brand, with a company, can be a lifelong level of commitment. When anyone talks about, for example, buying anything from Amazon or Zappos, right? If you've ever had to return anything to Amazon or Zappos, everybody has the same experience. It's incredible. The customer support is remarkable. It was way easier. And what do people say about Comcast? People say the opposite.
Look,
like
careful,
I was stuck in.
Careful, Jono.
I was stuck in.
I'm looking at the attendee list. By Comcast, you meant another company, obviously.
Sure, yeah. Well, I don't have a relationship with Comcast, and to be fair, Comcast is getting better at this. But historically, Comcast had a terrible reputation for customer service, and I think they realized, we need to move the needle on this, because
it's not a secret. I think that's one thing Comcast, just to give that clarification, is everyone thinks about, like, oh my God, my cable modem's out, and everyone rings and has the same experience. Have you tried rebooting it? Yes. 400 times, I can't believe I'm having this conversation. But
Exactly.
I just want to qualify that.
No, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I'm sure it's not the case with everybody, but there's a trend out there about that experience with Comcast. And to be fair, again, I think that, like, the last time I had a conversation with Comcast, it was fantastic. I think they identified that and they started fixing it. But the point is that the association with the brand is not just the use of the product, and that should apply to alumni communities in my mind. Is that, again, like, you know, when I've worked at previous companies, the way it should work in my mind is then when that person goes and works at, and I do this all the time, when that person goes and works with other companies, that they're always calling back to the things that they learned, the things that they discovered in a previous company. Like, I talk, for example, especially about Canonical all the time, what I learned, the people who I was working with, because it was such a formative element of my own career. I think that's really critical. So that's why I think we do need to be clear on the broader value, have a clarity of the tactics, and be intentional about it. And that's one of the things. I mean, I can summarize it here, but that's one of the things that People Power goes through is, you know, how to pick your audiences, how to build your onboarding, how to break your audience into the 3 different groups: casual, regular, and core members, and then how you use incentives to keep people. And
I think I'll put together, maybe, and I might ask you, Jono, just have your eyes on it, an example of an internal facing scorecard. And, you know, often we tell customers, like, there's sanity and vanity. For your senior leadership, make sure you're doing that line between their core objectives and what you're doing. You know, maybe you are using, you know, visits versus sessions. Maybe you are using, you know, or excluding some data points. Again, it's okay. Vanity statistics are okay as long as you have the sanity data, as long as you know the honest data, you know the real data, and you're making changes. But I think that's something that's really important. So, you know, I think jumping to, if I can, John, I want to jump to 2 questions that I got. And we got about 6 questions. These 2 I love. I want to be, essentially what we're being asked is, I want to be the community leader. I want to be the face. I want to fight for it. I want to be out there. But our leadership doesn't think it should be a person. It should be the brand. And, you know, I can't go upstairs, is essentially what she's saying, and say, look, the only way this works is if you let me be me, if you let me get in the trenches. How does someone who's not as senior, you know, tell someone upstairs, this is why?
So the way I would approach that is first of all to get alignment with the folks upstairs on what is the core value that we want to deliver, and say, like, so let's say, for the sake of just to keep it simple, let's say the core value is to continue to provide education and support to our alumni. Okay, so material, webinars, that kind of stuff. And so that's the first thing I do. The second thing I do is say, I want to make sure that, like, I have the oxygen to be successful in achieving that goal. So we're going to set some parameters on how I'm going to do that, and do that at a high level. So, for example, you know, I'm going to be sharing my own personality because that's what people are going to want, but I'm always going to be in service of the brand, right? That I'm going to maintain the brand voice and the brand principles that have been defined already. Those kinds of
include it as part of a story. It's not like, hey, I'm going to be your face of the brand. It's, hey, these are the objectives. To do that, I'm going to be slightly human. Here are the controls. Here are the guidelines. Here's the expectations, as opposed to, hey, that's a really good point. That's a really great way of doing that. And if you've been sending internal emails every month for the past 8 months, people are now used to your success, and they now buy into you as an individual. And I think when people buy into you as an individual and know your name, it's a lot easier for them to say, yes, we trust implicitly for you to go through that.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think the element here as well, in my mind, is you set that. So what that will do is it'll give you your execs the confidence that, A, we're operating on the goal that we all agree on. B, there's a sense of how the scope of this. But then what I'd recommend is start with something small and just do a great job at that. So it could be just running a single webinar, could be doing a single fireside chat, and say, why don't we commit to just running 1 or maybe even 2 of these, and then just go out there and kill it, do an amazing job, get a lot of attendees there, get a great attendee experience, get them to rate and review it. And then when you go back and provide that's, you know, 3 bullet point overview of the value that you always send via email. Don't send people PDFs or anything like that, because people can read their email on their phones. Then you want to be in a situation where your execs then say, wow, that was amazing, Julie. Not Julie. Let's keep going. And what will happen is gradually the confidence will build and build and build. The problem, I think, with some people is that they're so enthusiastic about the community, they can see the value of it, that they go and they present this big vision.
They're impatient. They don't have patience to get there. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's impatience. I think it's impatience mixed with enthusiasm. Right. And the problem, of course, is that the word community, I'm sure many people thought this when they joined the session, community can mean anything from a knitting circle to a giant technology movement. And a lot of execs, they just do not understand the scope and the parameters. And there's so much detail. And one thing that is a common human pattern is when we've got a lot of detail, even if we believe it's important and we're busy, we say, I'll get to that later on. And then we never get to it. And that's why I think breaking it down into those simple pieces is really important.
And there's always like, just one more thing. I wish they understood just one more thing, you know, and I think that's what you want to tell them versus what they want to hear. So, and of all of this, people in the trenches, you have to. If you are not fighting for your own community, if I can, any one of these attendees, I want to go on LinkedIn, I want to look you up. If you haven't talked about your community, tagged someone, linked someone, connected someone, then you don't have a community. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't apply to everything, but in general, if you don't have a community lead, if you can't tell me who is the person in the trenches, you don't have a community, you have a mailing list. The second would be fighting internally, making sure you're communicating, starting that mailing list, making it happen. The third is advocating, the who cares, the product manager. And the fourth, and in our final 30 seconds, it's essentially quantity or quality.
Yeah.
That's my question, Jono.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in quality. And again, I'm going to parrot Seth Godin here. Like his view is we have this obsession right now with building large audiences. And it's much more important to build a small audience and deliver amazing value. And I agree with that, right? Yeah, I agree. I think if you've got 50 people in a community and they are getting amazing value out of it, what you're going to do is you're going to ultimately get the social media effect, because one of those people, they're going to go and tell lots of other people about the great experience they've had with your company and what they've learned. And then other people are going to parrot those stories. And then gradually
if you focus on quality, you'll get quantity.
Exactly. I mean, that's how social media works, right? Is that people start out with no followers on Twitter, and then gradually they develop millions of followers because they keep delivering value that people want to share. And that's the approach that I would take.
Jono, thank you so much. For everyone else, as a reminder, this thing here, people powered, tremendous. Everyone's going to be getting a copy. Jono, you're tremendous. And I advise everyone to follow you on Twitter, on YouTube. You're an incredible source of information. I feel like I learn from you consistently. I get new ideas, new thoughts. And that's the point. Things that I don't have to agree with, but I perhaps hadn't considered. And I think you are insanely authentic in how you deliver that. I think it's much needed. And I'm unbelievably grateful that you took the time for me and for our entire audience out there. So with that,
thank you, James,
so much.
Likewise. And thanks for everybody for joining.
Thank you, guys. I'll see you next month, where we have Kathy from Burson on to talk about corporate alumni. So thank you so much, guys.